We come to the book of Obadiah, and he's warning someone else. He's warning the Edomites. We don't know anything about the man Obadiah. There are 12 or 13 of them in the Bible. We don't know when he lived. But on your chart, the writing date is 840 BC, which would actually make this the first prophet written down. We don't know when it was written, but we do know from the text it was a time when Jerusalem had been defeated and the Edomites were gloating over it. The Assyrians and the Babylonians are not mentioned in this book, so it is believed that the probable date was 840, right after the Philistines destroyed Jerusalem. The hardest part about this book will be finding it. Would you like to do that? It is the smallest book in the Old Testament. It's only 21 verses long. But small does not necessarily mean unimportant. I can have a small message like fire. It's important, isn't it? And this book has a very important message for us. Verse 1, it's the vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We've heard a report. An envoy has been sent among the nations. Arise, let us go against Edom for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You are greatly despised. We get the picture. God isn't too pleased with Edom. He says he's going to send out nations to fight them. He's going to make them small, and they are despised. Now, why would God be so worked up about the Edomites? I think we need to understand the history to get that clearly in our minds. So if you would put something in here so we can find it again, and come back to Genesis chapter 25, the very first book of the Bible. And we'll find the history of this country. In verse 19, we find that Abraham had a son, Isaac. Isaac had the same problem that his father did. He married Rebekah, but they didn't have babies. But we're told in verse 21 that Isaac did something very smart when he had a problem. He prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord answered. Rebekah's wife conceived, but the children struggled together within her. She said, "If it be so, why am I this way?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. All right, we find a couple things. First of all, he was 40 years old when he got married, but if you read on down, you find he was 60 years old when these babies were born. It tells us he prayed, God answered. My question is, do you think he waited till he was 59 to start praying? Or do you think he started praying at 40 but had to wait 20 years for an answer? It doesn't tell us, but I think there's a little message in there for us somehow. But we know that she did conceive, and there were twins in her womb. And they are struggling together within her. God says in verse 23, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Now that was not common for the younger to get the birthright. The birthright was given to the oldest son. It included several things. It included a double portion of the material goods, the inheritance, but it also meant that that person was the family priest. He had the spiritual leadership in the family. Even though it was not common, it should have been understood by this family because Isaac himself was the second born who was given the spiritual birthright. We're told in verse 25 that the birth time came, and the first came forth red all over like a hairy garment. They named him Esau. Doesn't sound like too cute a newborn, does it? Afterward, his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. We have the names of these 2 boys now, Jacob and Esau. Esau is the firstborn, and we see that they have conflict from the womb. These two brothers start battling. There's a struggle in the room, and there's even a struggle during the birth process where the one's trying to grab at the other. Two brothers with conflict from the womb. Well, it doesn't stop there. Verse 27 says they grow up. Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a peaceful man. Now, they may have been twins, but they weren't identical. They were very different. Esau's kind of the man's man, and Jacob's kind of the delicate one. Verse 28 tells us Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for the game that he caught, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now we see another problem about family feuds, and actually something that can cause one: parental preference. A parent choosing or preferring one child over another. We know the next story, probably it's about Esau coming in from hunting hungry. And his brother Jacob is at work in the kitchen making some red soup. And Esau says, "Give me some of that red stuff." And he said, "I will if you give me your birthright." And Esau says, "Well, what good is a birthright if I'm dead of hunger?" We're told that Esau despised his birthright. Now, the only thing about that story is that God had said before they were born who was going to get the birthright? The younger, Jacob. So he was bartering for something that was already his. And Esau was giving away something he didn't own. But we also see that Esau was not interested in spiritual things. All he cared about was his stomach full? How did he feel? Were his lusts being met? If you go to chapter 36, and don't do it, just let me read this to you. Chapter 36, verse 9. These are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites, who live in the hill country of Mount Seir. We're told there that Esau became the nation of Edom. We also know that Jacob had 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. So these two brothers became two nations, Israel and Edom. We know that the conflict that started in the womb and was festered on through life, as a matter of fact, come to chapter 27, because things get worse between these two brothers. Genesis chapter 27. We remember that Isaac became old. His eyes were dim. He could not see. And he calls Esau in and he says, "Go out and hunt some of that game that I like. Bring it to me. I'll eat it and bless you before I die." Rebekah overhears this conversation and says to her favorite son, Jacob, "Go out to the pen, get an animal. I'll fix it the way your father likes, and he will bless you before he dies." Jacob says, "Well, I might get caught and I'll seem like a deceiver." She says, "Do as I say." He gets the game, she fixes it, he takes it into father, and father's a little suspicious, and he says, "Who are you?" And Jacob says, I am Esau. I've done what you told me." And the father says, "Well, how could you find the game so quickly?" And he says, and listen to this, "Because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me." Oof. Can you believe we could even bring God's name into our deception? Isaac is still suspicious, and he says, "Come here and let me feel you." Well, Rebekah had covered Jacob's arms with the skin of animals and had put some of Esau's clothes on him. So Jacob feels him, and he feels right. And he said, "Let me kiss you." And he smelled him, and he smelled right. So he ate and blessed him. I think there's a little lesson in there for us. If we make our decisions based on how things look, how things feel, how things smell, we're going to be deceived, won't we? Esau comes in, and his brother has already been blessed. And we're told that the father trembles violently. And I think he trembles violently because he realizes he has disobeyed God in even thinking about blessing the firstborn when God said from the beginning, the second-born would receive the blessing. Well, chapter 27, verse 41 tells us that Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near, and then I will kill my brother." This family feud that started in the womb has now become a real conflict, hasn't it? This feud that started with these two brothers continues in the scriptures. When Israel came out of Egypt to go into the promised land, they asked twice to pass through the land of Edom. We're told that Edom stifled their compassion and would not allow them to go. Not only would they not allow them to go, but they came out against them with hard force. So Edom refused Israel's passage through their land during the Exodus. But the feud continues. This feud lasted for a long time, actually over 1,000 years. If you were to reread the history books that we've already studied, you would find that Saul fought against the Edomites. David fought against the Edomites. Solomon put down a revolt of the Edomites. Many, many of the kings fought against the Edomites. This conflict lasted a long time and was very fierce. Come back to Obadiah, verse 3. "The arrogance of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, in the loftiness of your dwelling place, who say in your heart, 'Who will bring me down to earth?' Though you build high like the eagle, though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord." All right, we see that Edom had a pride problem. It said they were arrogant. And the first thing we have to learn about pride from this book is that pride will deceive our hearts. Pride deceived Edom's heart. It will deceive ours as well. It is an interesting thing that pride is the source of all other sins. It's something that God says He hates. He gives a list of 6 things He hates, and it's number 1 on the list. And yet pride is difficult to see. You know, if I commit adultery or steal, it's obvious. But pride is that subtle sin of the heart that says, I don't need God. And that's really what they're saying is, we are secure without God. Self-sufficiency will be a clue that you've got a pride problem.